Good morning, AFPC. I am Ms. Trish Smith, and I will be briefing you today with my colleague, Ms. Audrey Tucker. We will cover the basics of retirement plan coding. Although this is a recorded training, you can email your questions to the Benefits and Entitlements address provided at the end of this session. We have lots of information to share with you today, and we hope you'll find it valuable. We will cover understanding the impact of retirement coding, understanding process of determining retirement coverage, and comprehending the appropriate retirement coverage plan. These slides should be used for a quick reference to the major provisions in law and regulation. They are not intended to be a complete or an all-encompassing reference document. First, we will look at some of the retirement coding actions and impacts. Human resource specialists who code and process RPAs must research, review, and fix errors in a timely manner. Errors are costly to agencies both monetarily and in man-hours, for HR as well as the DFAS payroll office. Errors may create financial hardship for the employees, former employees, and annuitants placed in the incorrect retirement systems. Like the law enforcement officer who wanted to retire but couldn't because he hadn't paid in enough money to the retirement system as a law enforcement officer. His retirement code was incorrect. HR specialists should follow up after RPAs have been processed and the actions consummated to ensure there are no rejects. DFAS does not get to see copies of the SF50s. They only receive the interface. This training is to assist HR specialists make accurate retirement coverage determinations and help understand basic coverage principles, laws, and regulations. Be sure to check payroll processing status to verify the action processed successfully or rejected to either pay new or payroll invalid reports. Actions that rejected DFAS may result in a debt for the employee. Remedy tickets must be submitted to DFAS timely with the SF50s for cancellations and corrections. Next, we will look at determining retirement coverage. Coverage depends on many factors. Research is a must, including review of the records and the service history. Review the dates and types of appointment, then ask, are any of the appointments excluded from either CSRS or FERS coverage by law, regulation, or exception? What happens when an employee is serving on a term appointment and considered vested in CSRS? Can the employee be placed in offset? No. Term appointments are excluded from CSRS coverage. They would get FICA with 6 months to elect FERS. Is there prior FERS coverage? Is it subject to Social Security? Just a reminder, for Social Security, we look at covered service and breaks in covered service or first hired on or after 1 January 1984. Is the 5-year test met? When applying the 5-year test, we use all potentially credible civilian service. Is there a break in service of more than 3 days? It's important to establish a consistent method in determining which retirement system to place an employee in. Chapter 10 of the CSRS and FERS Handbook is an excellent informational source and contains coverage determination tables that can be helpful. Don't forget that continuity of coverage is also a possibility. Some of the source documents we use are the SF50, the SF75, previous 50s, the NAF Air Force 2545, the OF 306, the SF 144, the PD position description, especially for law enforcement officers, air traffic controllers, and firefighters. The PD is helpful to determine special retirement for air traffic controllers, law enforcement officers, and firefighters. Just know that air traffic controllers, law enforcement, and firefighters have an age limitation. Also, that firefighters and law enforcement have a transfer requirement from primary to secondary positions. Some more documents we look at are in the onboarding manager, the electronic OPF, and USA staffing supporting documents. So Ms. Audrey, what is CSRS and FERS?
The Civilian Service Retirement System, CSRS, and the Federal Employees Retirement System, FERS, is the retirement plan that all federal employees are covered by, unless specifically excluded by law or regulation. CSRS was created 1 August of 1920 until officially closed on 31 December 1983. Social Security tax did not exist during this time. While the government was working on a new retirement system, the CSRS interim coverage was implemented from 1 January 1984 until 31 December 1986. When the CSRS retirement system was officially closed on 31 December 1983, employees newly hired on or after January 1st of 1984 were now subject to Social Security deductions. On 1 January 1987, FERS was created and employees with CSRS interim coverage acquired either FERS or CSRS Offset coverage. The employee may transfer to FERS if they have a break in cover service of more than 3 days, it is FERS open season, or they have a qualifying FERCA error, a Federal Erroneous Retirement Coverage Correction Action. In looking at the employees that meet the CSRS eligibility, employees first hired in a covered appointment before 1 January 1984, or employees rehired in a covered appointment after a break in service of less than 365 days from a CSRS covered appointment. In looking at appointments excluded from CSRS coverage by law or regulation, you're looking at your temporary appointments not to exceed 1 year, your term appointments, your temporary appointment pending establishment of register, TAPER, your accepted indefinite appointment, and your intermittent work schedules, unless serving under a career or occasional appointment. On the next slide, we will look at the SF50 Block 30 for the retirement coding for CSRS. The CSRS retirement plan code, the 1, which is CSRS, and then you have code 6, which is CSRS special for your law enforcement officers and firefighters. Just a reminder that in Block 30 on the SF50, air traffic controllers, your law enforcement officers, and firefighters have an age limitation. Also, that firefighters and law enforcement officers have a transfer requirement from primary to secondary positions based on BPD. And looking at CSRS Offset, on January 1987, personnel officers were tasked to review official personnel folders, OPF, of all employees covered under CSRS interim to determine whether or not they would be placed in CSRS Offset or FERS. Know that no one would remain covered under interim as of 1 January 87. They either became CSRS Offset or FERS. It's important you understand the difference between interim and offset. CSRS Offset eligibility coverage is employees not automatically covered by FERS, employees who meet the 5-year test as of 31 December 86, employees who had a break in CSRS covered service of more than 365 days and have at least 5 years credible federal civilian service or are given a 6-month opportunity period to elect to transfer to FERS. With CSRS Offset, the employee is subject to reduced CSRS contributions and Social Security taxes. This is also in reference under the CSRS and FERS Handbook on the opm.gov website, Chapter 10. On the next slide, we will look at the SF50 Block 30 for retirement coding for CSRS Offset. So looking at the plan codes for CSRS Offset, You have a C for FICA and CSRS partial, which too includes your air traffic controllers, your law enforcement officers, and your firefighters. A E code was FICA and CSRS special partial for your law enforcement officers and firefighters only. So, Ms. Trish, what is potentially credible civilian service?
When determining retirement coverage, all potentially credible civilian service is used. This is different from looking at service for its potential in crediting time for eligibility or retirement computation purposes. All federal civilian service for CSRS is potentially credible. This includes deposit and redeposit service. Employees who have had intermittent service receive credit for actual days worked while covered in an intermittent appointment. Periods of paid or unpaid leave without pay, absent military service, also known as USERRA, are not potentially credible service unless they exercise restoration rights. One of our references is the OPM Benefits Administration Letter 12-104 dated 3 October 2012 and the Field Advisory Service Retirement Coverage Determinations dated October 2006. For service not creditable, do not use the employee's SED from Block 31 on the SF50 to determine length of credible civilian service. The SF50 SED is adjusted to reflect the amount of credible service towards leave, not retirement coverage. Periods of paid or unpaid leave without pay, absent military service, also known as USERRA, are not potentially credible service. So what is credible? Well, when determining retirement coverage, all potentially credible civilian service is used, and this is different from looking at service for its potential in crediting time for eligibility or retirement computation purposes. USERRA service is credible as civilian service because it qualifies as a period of military furlough. Continuity of coverage. CSRS and FERS employees retain retirement coverage in the new position. Employees who change from a position or appointment type that is covered to one that is excluded from coverage by regulation but not by law, and have no break in service or have a break of 3 days or less, retain their retirement coverage in the new position. On the next slide, we have a chart for determining potentially credible service. Notice the dates along the top and when each program became effective. And the lines across describe what is and is not credible. So, Ms. Audrey, what is FICA?
FICA, the Federal Insurance Contribution Action, also known as Social Security and Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance, was administered by the Social Security Administration and was the basis for Social Security benefits. And it covers employees on appointments excluded from any other federal retirement system coverage. And looking at employees who are covered under FICA only, we referenced in an earlier slide the appointment of those employees who are excluded from CSRS coverage, such as your temporary, not to exceed 1 year or less, employees on intermittent work schedule, other than career or career conditional appointments, and those employees rehired with a break in service of more than 1 year and meets the 5-year test will be covered under FICA only. On the next slide, we will look at the SF50 Block 30 for the retirement coding for FICA, which is a Plan Code 2. Next, we have applying the 5-year test. We have been referring to the 5-year test in our earlier slides. The 5-year test is a methodical approach to making retirement coverage determinations. This is the key to consistent accuracy in a determination. The 5-year test applies to all retirement coverage determinations made on or after 1 January 1987. But before you begin the coverage determination steps, write out the employee's service history and showing all periods of service and types of appointments. Normally, the 5-year test is not applicable to employees who have previously been covered by FERS. However, there is always a potential that an employee has been erroneously placed under the wrong retirement plan. When processing a rehire, conversion, or transfer, check to ensure the employee was previously placed in the correct retirement plan. And looking at potential scenarios to consider when looking at the determination steps. Employees who satisfy the 5-year test will not be automatically covered by FERS. 5-year test is met if employees had 5 years of credible civilian service as of 31 December 86, employee vested in CSRS and remains under CSRS. The 5-year test is also met if an employee has a break in service of more than 3 days ending on or after 1 January 1987 and has at least 1 day under CSRS and has 5 years of potentially credible civilian service as of the break in service. If the 5-year test is not met, employee will be placed in FERS. The next slide provides a decision logic tree. So let's go through the steps of a scenario. So starting at the top, you have appointment before 1 January of 2013. Is the current appointment permanent? We'll go to yes. Did the employee have prior FERS coverage? No. Was the employee first hired in a covered appointment on or after 1 January 84, but before 1 January of 2013? No. Did the employee have a break in covered service of more than 365 days ending on or after 1 January 84, but before 1 January 2013? No. Is this a term appointment? No. The employee must be placed in CSRS with a 6-month opportunity to elect FERS. So, Ms. Trish, what is FERS?
FERS was created in 1986 in accordance with the Public Law 99-335 and became effective 1 January 1987. It is a tiered retirement plan that provides benefits from 3 different sources: the FERS Retirement Annuity, Social Security, and the Thrift Savings Plan. Employees pay Social Security taxes and FERS retirement deductions. Remember, indefinite, term, and taper appointments are excluded from CSRS coverage, but not from the FERS coverage. Once an employee has elected or been covered correctly by FERS, he or she will remain in FERS. Just because an employee was placed under FERS does not mean the employee was correctly placed in FERS. Check the electronic OPF for any FERS election forms to make sure. With the establishment of FERS, the CSRS retirement became a closed system. Therefore, employees first hired on or after 1 January 1984 cannot be placed in CSRS coverage. On the next slide, let's see who is covered. Employees covered by FERS are first hired in a covered appointment on or after 1 January 1984, hired in an indefinite term or taper appointment, rehired in a covered appointment after a break in service of more than 365 days and do not meet the 5-year test. They may be rehired in a covered appointment after a separation from an appointment covered by FERS. Also, if they elected FERS coverage during a valid election opportunity, such as open season, or a break in coverage of more than 3 days. Next, we have the SF50. And Block 30 is for retirement plan coding for FERS. We have the K, which is FERS and FICA, the L for FERS and FICA Air Traffic Controllers, the M for the FERS and FICA Special Law Enforcement and Firefighters, N is for FERS and FICA Reserve Technicians. Miss Audrey, are there any uniques or exceptions?
Yes, we have a few uniques and exceptions to consider. Note, this slide is to reiterate the importance of knowing the exclusion of these appointments under CSRS. Exclusives. Appointments excluded from CSRS, but not FERS, are your term appointments, your taper, your accepted indefinite appointments, and then you have employees that are placed in FICA only if rehired under any of the appointments listed above, and have a break in service of more than 365 days and meet the 5-year test. Keep in mind that meeting the 5-year test means employee is vested in CSRS and will not be automatically be placed in FERS. They will be placed in FICA only, Retirement Plan 2. An exception to the continuity of coverage are employees converted or having a break in service of 3 days or less from a permanent appointment to a temp or term appointment will retain their original retirement coverage. For example, you have a police officer who is currently on a permanent appointment and wanted to get promoted. He accepted a term appointment. With his new appointment, he will retain his original retirement coverage. So that was the uniques. Let's look at FERS-RAE. Effective 1 January of 2013, the FERS-Revised Annuity Employees, FERS-RAE, was created. FERS-RAE employees contribute to FERS retirement system in addition to FICA deductions. Employees covered by FERS-RAE were first hired from 1 January 2013 to 31 December 2013, or rehired to or converted to covered appointments from 1 January 2013 to 31 December 2013, with a break in service of more than 3 days and with less than 5 years of credible or potentially credible service. Employees under FERS-RAE will pay 3.1% of their base pay to the retirement fund, which is 2.3% higher than the amount current FERS employees contribute. Keep in mind, your air traffic controllers, your firefighters, and your law enforcement officers will pay 4.9% of their base pay to the retirement fund. This is in reference to our earlier example that why it's important to make sure the retirement plan code is correct. A break in FERS coverage of 3 days or less is not considered to be a break in service, and the individual will retain FERS coverage. Your paid and unpaid military service does not count towards the 5 years of credible or potentially credible service. Next, we will look at the SF50 Block 30 for retirement coding for FERS-RAE. Looking at Block 30, the R was added after each code to indicate the new plan under FERS-RAE. So your KR for your FERS and FICA, LR for FERS and FICA for air traffic controllers, MR for FERS and FICA special law enforcement officers and your firefighters, and NR for FERS and FICA for your reserve technicians. Next, you see some exceptions for FERS-RAE. So employees are excluded from FERS-RAE if on 31 December 2012 they were covered under FERS or was performing civilian service which is credible or potentially credible service under FERS, or had performed at least 5 years of civilian service credible or potentially credible under FERS, including service subject to CSRS or CSRS Offset, or was subject to CSRS, CSRS Offset, or FICA only, and elected to transfer to FERS. In continuing, employees who separate from federal service with less than 5 years of FERS service and rehired after a break of 3 days or less. You also have your FERS employees in receipt of compensation benefits. There's FERS employees on leave without pay, LWOP, for more than 6 months in calendar year 2012. Or you have FERS employees who separate from federal service before 31 December 2012 to enter military service and exercise restoration rights. Your FERS employees who go on LWOP while performing active duty military service and do not return to federal civilian service by exercising their restoration rights. So let's look at our decision logic tree on the next slide. So starting from the top, your appointment effective date was from 1 January 2013 to 31 December 2013. The employee currently covered or covered within the last 3 days by CSRS Offset, your Foreign Service Pension System, FSPS, or your FERS. Yes, the employee keeps their current CSRS Offset, FSPS, or their FERS coverage. So, Ms. Trish, can you tell us about FERS-FRAE?
Yes, FERS-FRAE is the further revised Annuity Employees Plan, which was created by the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013, signed into law on 26 December 2013, which mandated new employees hired on or after 1 January 2014 pay increased contributions to the FERS retirement system. The FERS-FRAE employees contribute 4.4% of their base pay. So who is covered under FERS-FRAE? New employees hired or converted to a covered appointment on or after 1 January 2014 with less than 5 years of federal civilian service. Next, we have the SF50. And the Block 30 Retirement Plan Code for FERS-FRAE, the F was added to each code to indicate the new plan. FERS-FRAE. KF is your FERS-RAE and FICA. LF is your FERS-RAE and FICA Air Traffic Controller. MF is your FERS and FICA Special for law enforcement and firefighters only. NF is your FERS and FICA for reserve technicians. Let's take a look at our decision tree. In the top in the middle, we have the appointment on or after 1 January 2014. Our next is the employee currently covered or covered within the last 3 days by CSRS Offset, FSPS, which is the federal the Foreign Service Pension System, FERS or FERS-RAE. No. Was the employee on leave without pay US, or workers' compensation on December 31st, 2013? No. Was the employee covered by CSRS Offset, the FSPS, or FERS on 31 December 2012, or by FERS-RAE on 31 December 2013? Yes. Employee keeps their last retirement coverage held. If they were CSRS, you see the CSRS and FERS determination decision tree. We also have to consider NAF. The non-appropriated fund to appropriated fund moves is governed by the NAF Retirement Credit Act of 1986 and Public Law 99-638, which provides the CSRS credit for former NAF service and requires that NAF service be in certain MWR positions after June 18, 1952 and before 1 January 1966. Affected employees were primarily Army NAF employees in recreation, youth activities, and arts and crafts positions who were not covered by NAF retirement system. The Portability of Benefits for NAF Employees Act of 1990, Public Law 101-508, permits employees to remain in their civil service or NAF retirement plan when they move between appropriated funds and NAF employment systems. It requires employees be vested 5 years in the retirement plan. It does not permit CSRS and FERS credit for former NAF service. And it was enacted primarily to assist DoD employees affected by the January 1st, 1987 congressionally directed restructuring of the MWR program. The portability of Portability of Benefits for NAF Employees Act of 1990, Public Law 101-508, covers moves between the NAF to the appropriated funds positions on or after 1 January 1987 without a break in service of more than 3 days. Eligible employees must be given the opportunity to elect within 30 days of notification to remain in the NAF retirement plan. The NAF retirement indicator code must be coded in DCPDS for employees who transfer from non-appropriated funds to appropriated funds and do not elect to retain their NAF retirement coverage. The next slide shows where in DCPDS to find the NAF retirement indicator. You click on People, Enter and Maintain, then input the Social Security number, click on Extra Information, scroll down to U.S. Fed, Separation and Retirement, and then down to the NAF retirement indicator. For employees transferring from NAF to the appropriate funds who choose not to retain their NAF retirement coverage must be coded correctly with a 0. Another area to check in DCPDS is for the FERS coverage, which is under the U.S. Fed Conversion to Appointment, FERS coverage, and then you would choose the appropriate code. Another area to ensure is coded correctly is your mandatory separation date, that's flex field in DCPDS. You find it by going to People, Enter and Maintain, you select Extra Information, you go to U.S. Fed Separation and Retirement, and then click on Mandatory Retirement Date. This is just another area, and that this is for the firefighters, law enforcement, and air traffic controllers. Here are some NAF references for your review. And here we have some links. We have the OPM retirement website, the CSRS and FERS handbook, and the OPM benefits administration letters. And here are some more links to your Code of Federal Regulations, our 5 CFR, and our 5 USC Uniform Code. Also, the Retirement Coverage Determinations Retirement Guide, dated 2011, a guide for human resource specialists. If you need assistance in coding or determining eligibility or correcting rejects, please contact your lead or technician first. If they are unable to assist you, contact AFPC Benefits and Entitlements team at afpc.dpieb@us.af.mil. Thank you for tuning in to this webcast. As a reminder, send your questions to the Benefits and Entitlements email address on the previous slide. We hope you have a great Air Force Day.